Welcome back, artists. I'm Wyatt Paints, and this week I'm finishing off the collection of Hex3d heads with a couple of iconic ones from Toy Story, Buzz and Woody. And them being toys lets me do some creative things. I'm going to give them a Terminator-style endoskeleton, which means we're going to be able to make some very unsettling but nostalgic pieces to finish off the collection. And no sponsor this week, so you know the drill. Subscribe, like, leave a comment if you can. With that said, let's get right to work. Meet me over at the painting table. I'm gonna grab my brushes. Let's get started. As per usual, I'm gonna be starting with the bases, and in particular, Woody's boot. While I want to be as screen accurate as I can, I wouldn't feel right just basing this brown and calling it a day. So after applying a base of leather brown, I used a soft tone on all the major seams and stitching. I needed a few coats to get this to the depth I was looking for, but it's always better to use multiple coats than one thick one. When you use one thick one, it'll dry very uneven and most likely leave tide marks. So just keep it thin and reapply until it gets dark enough. A quick dry brush of leather brown is perfect for knocking back the shade to make it a thin outline around everything, but it's key to avoid any stabbing motions. You want the bristles to hop over these deeper areas. Next, I pulled that burgundy brown to take care of the soles and add a bit of contrast around the boot. Looking good. One more major step to go, thinning down some gritty gold for those spurs. A few thin coats got me where it would be reasonable to call it done, but since I had all that nice stitching, I figured why not get in there and stitch them up with some command khaki. This step may not be for everyone, but if your eyes and hands are feeling sharp, take the opportunity to try and push yourself. With a model like this, it's super forgiving when it comes to repaints. Now, you might notice I did not paint the large laces. Personally, I think they need to stay the same color as the boot, just like in the movie. If I paint them a contrasting color, it'll stop looking like a cowboy boot and more like a sneaker. And after I finished the stitching, it was looking primo. So I set it aside to go jump over onto Buzz's boot. Since this needed a very light gray, it only made sense to start with a medium gray like ash and work my way up to a final color of Starship. This is one of those instances where priming in white or even gray would have been better, but all I had was black. For the green details, I went with leafy green. Now, unlike Woody's boot, there really isn't any extra detail to embellish, so I'm gonna go for a basic toy aesthetic. So that means I'll be keeping all these colors as flat as I can. Finally, cultish purple, finish off the boot with a color on the sole. Time to jump up to those heads. And since I'm going to be going with a Terminator vibe, a black prime is a perfect start. What's needed next is a diluted overbrush of gunmetal to get a nice even sheen. Because this is diluted, I'll need a few extra coats to get a full shine. And while this may take a bit longer than my typical metal dry brush, I can't argue the results. A nice even shine that reflects light well and has deep shadows. Now, we could leave it here, but my client wanted me to stress and weather the metal, and that's going to be easy enough. First, I want to reinforce those shadows with oil stain, doing a heavy pass on all the key shadow areas like between the teeth, the undersurfaces, and wherever metal meets the insulation foam. Once that dries, I add an all-over general pitting using a stiff stipple. This will leave me with a nice random texture. Once everything sets, it should look mostly the same, just a little less sheens and the reflections completely knocked down in the shadows. Next, it's time for one of my favorite tools, Dirty Down Rust. For this first pass, I'm going to stipple it in all the deep shade areas. This way, when I come back with a second all over stippling, these areas will get a double dose. By the time I finish this step, it should look like I did a bit too much, because that's the goal. Now with everything dry, I use a bit of clean water and a dabbing dry brush to reactivate and smush the rust around. The idea here is to use taps to slowly clean the surfaces that I want to get back to silver. So long as you clean your brush often, this should be a fun and fast step. Just be careful of using any kind of brush strokes. You run the risk of leaving unnatural swirls. A stipple is the best way to get these kind of results. After cleaning everything I wanted to, I gave it a good varnish to lock it down, then loaded up some gunmetal to lightly stipple in a highlight on the cleanest areas to catch that shine again. Varnishing here is important, otherwise you run the risk of reactivating the rust again. Also, I want to keep this really reserved, so just a few taps here and there and move on. Moving on to the foam, I went with crystal blue. It's going to contrast with his skin and metal nicely. It just needs a quick wash with dark blue tone, followed by a highlight of electric blue. You don't have to go too crazy trying to hit every single boil. In fact, doing so will make it really easy to overdo it. I find limiting myself to just the largest ones tends to have them stick out and grab a bit more attention. Moving on to the skin, Cobalt threads the needle on that screen accurate tone. Lay it on thin and keep it smooth. Once I had my opacity built up, I lined all the important face details, like around the eyes, with a bit of soft tone. And then just like the boots, a light dry brush of Cobalt softens those shadows until you can barely see them, but it's still giving that subtle definition to the face. I brighten up the eyes to a light gray to prep them for the pupils. Now, Woody of course has brown eyes, so Brigandine Brown came back to base the entire iris. Then, using a brush just smaller than the eye, dab in a bit of detail using leather brown, but keep it light to maintain a darker outer ring. Then a bit of black on the pupil and light gray for the shine, and Woody was looking the part. Buzz went about the same, but he has blue eyes, so I used Regal and Electric. All that's left is to paint within the line section, browning up Woody's hair and purpling up Buzz's flight sock thing. And easy peasy, lemon squeezy, we're done. And these came out great. There's a certain amount of sinister vibe I get from, while also being wholesome. I think they might be my favorite heads in the entire collection. But what about you guys? Do you guys have a favorite? If you do, let me know in the comments. I've got to get this packed up and shipped out to my client and get started on the next project, which may or may not be Absolute Wonder Woman. We'll see. I've also got a few other projects. We'll see what I can get in as quickly as possible. So that means this has to be goodbye. But as always, thanks for watching. Stay creative and always enjoy the process.